I call Matt Chorley.
And Patrick Maguire. And here he is in the studio. How are you?
Good afternoon. Well, I'm hurt and upset that you've spent so much time with Lindsay Hall recently and you haven't taken the opportunity
I'll tell you what,
to get him to record.
When we're in Chorley next week, next Friday, I'll get him to do it then, because you are quite right. We should update that jingle. It's not the most pressing thing. We can see the pictures from the House of Commons just winding up the earlier set of questions. The House of Commons packed out for PMQs in a way that we haven't seen it for 18 months, and we haven't seen it at all while we've been doing PMQs Unpacked.
It's Keir Starmer's very first test in this environment, and let's see whether get the clapometer out on the Labour benches, but also let's see how he responds to sort of Tory barracking. We had a bit of it in the Afghanistan recall debate and in the debate yesterday, but this is a different kettle of fish entirely.
And the big question is, what is he going to do about this national insurance rise? An extraordinary situation where nobody from Labour did any media this morning on it.
Yes, exactly. That's because Labour hasn't beyond not wanting to come out and endorse tax. They're terrified of being seen as a tax and spend party, even though the Conservative Party has remade itself and redefined itself seemingly as a tax and spend party. They don't want to fall into what they think is a trap. But in the process, they found themselves in a position of quite empty opposition, saying we don't like high taxes or raising taxes, to which the question is, well, what do you want then? And as you say, they don't have an answer. And for Keir Starmer, that's politically very difficult, because then you have people like Andy Burnham making a divisive but at least coherent case for taxes on wealth, and others on the left of the party saying stepping into that vacuum and saying things that Keir Starmer would not want the Labour Party to say, it seems. So let's see if he goes in on social care, whether he has A, plan of his own, or B, a rejoinder to what Boris Johnson will inevitably say. We will definitely hear Boris Johnson say, as he did yesterday, well, what is your plan?
And I was looking, because, this is how I like to spend my mornings. I looked back at the Labour manifesto from 2019, which promised big tax hikes on high earners. There were increasing income tax for people on over £80,000 and over £125,000. And on their own sums, it would raise about £5.5 billion. So about half the amount that Boris Johnson's is talking about. And part of the problem is, if you want to raise big sums, you have to tax lots of people. There's a symbolism and there's a fairness question about taxing the very wealthy. But unless you really, really clobber them, you don't raise enough money to pay for things like the social care and the NHS issue.
Yeah, indeed. And that's why, when Andy Burnham, when he was Health Secretary in 2010, proposed, he talks about this white paper he proposed and it was all about death duties. And the Tories, as you'll remember, Matt, very effectively campaigned on it in the general election as Labour's death tax, precisely because, and then George Osborne politically adroitly went on to take a lot of people out of inheritance tax, because everyone hates the idea of inheritance tax. So even Andy Burnham saying let's tax wealth, what he means is everybody will pay, a larger number of people will pay inheritance tax, which is itself toxic. So, as you say, it's all very well and good Labour saying we don't want to tax working people, but the absence, the vacuum they've left, rather proves your point, I think.
And in terms of the politics of this, the polling is really interesting. So at the weekend, we had a poll, a YouGov poll for the Times, asked, would you support increasing the basic rate of national insurance from 12% to 13% in order to increase spending on the NHS? 64% of people support that. Now 44% of people actually support what Boris Johnson's doing, narrowly ahead of the 43% of people who oppose. So let's see how all the politics all pans out. It's PMQs Unpacked. We go live to the House of Commons for the first question from Keir Starmer.
Right Honourable Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to ask the Prime Minister about the promise he made to the British people to guarantee that no one needing care has to sell their home to pay for it. Does that guarantee still stand?
Mr. Speaker, what this plan for health and social care does is deal, after decades, with the catastrophic costs faced by millions of people, the risks that they face up and down the the country that they could face the loss of their home, their possessions, their ability to pass on anything to their children. This is the government that is not only dealing with that problem, but understands that in order to deal with the problems of the NHS backlogs, you also have to fix social care. We're taking the tough decisions, Mr. Speaker, that the country wants to see. We're putting another £36 billion in. And what I'd like to know from the leader of the Labour Party, Mr. Speaker, is what is he going to do tonight? The silence from Mission Control in his...
Can I just say, if you don't want to hear the Prime Minister, I certainly do, and I can't hear him. It's not acceptable. Prime Minister, have you finished?
That's the Speaker there, ticking off Tory MPs.
Leader of the Opposition, whether he's going to vote for our measures tonight, Mr. Speaker.
I know the House has been away, but it's still Prime Minister's questions. Keir Starmer.
Oh, well, let's just jump in. Already, Patrick, we're seeing the difference. We're seeing what happens when you fill the House of Commons with MPs. They make a lot more noise. So, I mean, I think an interesting line of attack from Keir Starmer is whether or not Boris Johnson's plan, as laid out, addresses the thing that he once promised, to guarantee that people won't have to sell their homes in order to fund their care. That is not, even on the plan laid out yesterday, a promise that he can keep, is it?
No, it's not. Particularly with that, with the cap and the taper rate, there is no guarantee that nobody will have to sell their home. Certainly, particularly if you're at the lower end of that asset range, and you have a house that's not worth very much. Over, say it's worth 170 grand, and you have to find that 80 grand somewhere. So, as you say, he can't keep that promise. And
I suppose the big question for most people, the single big asset they have is their home. So to say that you will only have to spend up to £80,000 on care is better than an unlimited amount. But most people can't lay their hands on £80,000 without selling their house.
Exactly, and the political value of this, you saw this in the grudging praise Boris Johnson got from all political quarters yesterday. This is such a massive issue politically that being seen to sort it is making a stop. But what do we mean by sort it? I think most reasonable people in the public would say, well, nobody wants to sell their home or sell Granny's house.
That's been the thing that why this has been such a
that was exactly why Theresa May's plan was so toxic. So Keir Starmer is clearly trying to draw a line between them. But then you saw the rejoinder that I predicted from the Prime Minister.
Well, also not. Well, let's go back and see if slightly weirdly, Keir Starmer answers the question from Boris Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I noticed the Prime Minister didn't stand by his guarantee that no one will need to sell their house to pay for care. Let me explain why he didn't. Under the Prime Minister's plan, someone with £186,000, if you include the value of their home, that's not untypical across the country in all of your constituents, facing large costs because they have to go into care, will have to pay £86,000 under his plan, and that's before living costs. Where does the Prime Minister think that they're going to get that £86,000 without selling their home?
Mr. Speaker, as I think everybody understood in the long debate, a long statement yesterday, this is the first time that the state has actually come in to deal with the threat of these catastrophic costs, and thereby enabling, Mr. Speaker, the private sector, the financial services industry, to supply the products, the insurance products that people need to guarantee themselves against the cost of care. And what we're actually doing, Mr. Speaker, is lifting the floor, lifting the guarantee for up to £100,000, where nobody has to pay anything across the entire country. And what we still have to hear from the opposition is what they would do to fix the backlogs in the NHS. And fix social care after decades of inertia and inactivity. What would he do?
I can see a pattern emerging here, Patrick Maguire. Keir Starmer is very keen to get into the weeds of this, the detail of the policy, and Boris Johnson wants to very much focus on the politics. We should point out, as expected, almost all Labour MPs are wearing masks. One or two masks on the Tory backbenches, but most not wearing masks. Anything more to add to those exchanges? It was essentially the same exchange as the first one.
I'd say, but I think Boris Johnson does have a point that this policy issue has been defined by almost a decade and more of inertia. So the value of doing anything at this point politically, regardless of the merits of the policy, and as we go on, more people being drawn into tax, the political impact of that may outweigh the benefit at this point. But being seen to be the government who get a grip of this policy issue is worth more politically, I would argue, at this point than the downfalls of the policy. In years to come, when the bulk of this money, this hypothecated tax, is swallowed up by the NHS and not social care, the quality of care hasn't improved, families still find themselves, i.e. selling their houses, and they're clobbered by the so-called hotel costs of residential care, then maybe a storm will come. But Boris Johnson clearly thinks he's always got his eye on legacy building. I will be the Prime Minister who tackled head-on this policy issue that nobody else was willing to. And the Labour Party, crucially, are not going to propose anything. And so, again, Keir Starmer looks like the backseat driver, the hurler in the ditch, the fence sitter in chief.
The Harry Enfield character. I don't believe he wanted to do that, turning up after the event. I have to say, looking at the pictures, Boris Johnson looks like he's enjoying himself more than Keir Starmer. But let's go back and see if Starmer is going to enjoy his third question.
Keir Starmer!
His plan is to impose an unfair tax on working people. My plan is to ensure that those with the broadest shoulders pay their fair share. That is the difference.
Order. Both sides. I need to hear the question. I also need to hear the answers. If there's some MPs who don't want to hear it, and I'm sure the constituents want to hear it, it's not good to shout either side down when they are either asking or answering a question. Please, our constituents are interested. I want to hear, and they'll want to hear. Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. His plan is to impose unfair taxes on working people. My plan is to ensure those with the broadest shoulders pay their fair share. I know they don't like that debate. The truth is, his plans don't do what he claims. People will still face huge bills. Many homeowners will need to sell their homes. He's not denying it when he could have done. And the Prime Minister has failed the only test he set for himself for social care. It was in the manifesto. Another manifesto promised, Prime Minister. No good shaking your head. And who's going to pay for the cost of this failure? Working people. Under his plan, a landlord renting out dozens of properties won't pay a penny more, but their tenants in work will face tax rises of hundreds of pounds a year. A care worker earning the minimum wage doesn't get a pay rise under this plan, but does get a tax rise. In what world is that fair?
Let's hear from Boris Johnson in response
actually,
to that.
the Institute for Fiscal Studies has confirmed that this is a broad-based and progressive measure. The top 20% of households by income will pay 40 times what the poorest 20% pay. The top 14% pay half of the entire levy. Now, Mr. Speaker, he talks about his plan. Well, actually, it turns out I've been scouring the records for evidence of the Labour plan, and I found it, Mr. Speaker. In 2018, the current Shadow Secretary of State for Social Care joined forces with Nick Bowles and Norman Lamb to promote a new dedicated health and social care tax, Mr. Speaker, based on national insurance. The current, where is she? I can't see her in her place, Mr. Speaker. And she said this was to be the country's beverage moment.
It's Liz Kendall, the Shadow Care Minister,
is the Labour Party really going to vote against the new beverage moment tonight?
Rishi Sunak enjoying that very much on the front bench there. A bit of sharp political research by the Conservative Party. And that is the problem, isn't it? But when Keir Starmer says, my plan is to ensure that those with the broadest shoulders pay their fair share, we haven't got a plan from the Labour Party. There is no specific tax rise on the wealthy they're talking about. And as I was saying at the beginning, even the tax rise to target those with the broadest shoulders as set out by John McDonnell would only have raised half the amount of money that Boris Johnson is.
And if they did come back with a concrete proposal, they'd find that they were encountering the same political squeamishness that they are turning on the Tories, i.e. the public in our home-owning democracy are very protective of their homes. So nobody wants to embrace a policy that puts people's mortgage-free, the mortgage-free houses of pensioners at risk. And that is what Andy Burnham wouldn't put the houses at risk, but big levies on estates, the dementia tax. What do these policies have in common? The idea that I've worked hard all my life and you're taking it away from me, regardless of whether that's an accurate critique, it's what the public think.
And the interesting point that Keir Starmer was making about landlords and their earnings, because they don't pay national insurance on those earnings, they would pay income tax. But the argument is that the government's gone for national insurance because people associate that with the NHS. It's the nice bit of the tax that you pay. And an increase in national insurance is seen as a nicer, politically easier thing to do than an increase in income tax. Well, let's go back and hear Keir Starmer, question number 4.
Mr. Speaker, let me tell you what an ambitious young member for Henley said in 2002 in this House.
That was Boris Johnson in his first outing
What
as
he
a Conservative
said in
MP.
this House, national insurance increases are regressive. I wonder what happened to him. Mr. Speaker, if the Prime Minister is going ahead with this unfair tax, can he at least tell us this? Will his plan clear the NHS waiting list backlog by the end of this Parliament? Yes or no?
That's probably the big political question.
I think the whole House, indeed the whole country, can appreciate that we at least have a plan to fix the backlogs. And we at least understand, Mr. Speaker, that the only way to fix the long-term underlying problems in the NHS, the problem of delayed discharges, is to fix the crisis in social care as well, which Labour failed to address for decades. And we're going on ahead and doing it, Mr. Speaker. And what I've just understood for him tonight, I think out of that minestrone of nonsense has floated a crouton of fact. He is going to vote against the measures tonight. They're going to vote against plans to fix the backlogs and fix social care. Vote Labour, Mr. Speaker. Wait longer.
Right.
It's interesting how that very effortless pivot from Boris Johnson at the end of that classic oration with his favourite metaphor, the minestrone, used to describe sloppy oratory. I always enjoy that one. Note how seamlessly he pivoted from this is a social care tax to this is an NHS backlog tax. And in doing so, he preempts the criticism that Labour will inevitably, indeed wants to make at the next election, which is, look at your NHS waiting list, look how long you're waiting for routine treatment. When we came into government in 97, we fixed this, the same old Tories, it's the same old, degradation of the NHS, you're having to wait longer for treatment, your local hospital is on the rocks. Boris Johnson's having it both ways. It's classic cakeism. It's both a tax to solve the social care crisis once and for all, as Rishi Sunak described it in this morning's Times as well. And it's also, we're fixing the NHS
We're spending
backlog.
it. We can spend it double.
Even though the latter is the reason why this probably isn't a lasting settlement to solve social care.
The implication
it's just
is
more
that in
money.
3 years' time, they're going to have to take £12 billion off the NHS, essentially.
Yeah, exactly.
But the other thing that's worth really pointing out, the political research of both teams, I think it's fair to say, have upped their game. Digging out what Liz Kendall once did, the shadow care minister. It was quite smart by Number 10. And then the Labour team digging around in what Boris Johnson said when he was the MP for Henley.
You don't have to look very hard for a Telegraph comment piece or a parliamentary speech from a younger Boris Johnson that contradicts what Boris Johnson's saying now. Indeed, sometimes you just have to look to last week.
Let's go back then. Question number 5. This is Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, it was a yes-no question. You either clear the backlog or you don't. And he can't even say that he'll do that. So there we have it. Working people will pay higher tax. Those in need will still lose their homes to pay for care. And he can't even say if the NHS backlog will be cleared. Well, he gesticulates, but they're all breaking their manifesto promises and putting up taxes on their working constituents for this. And, Mr. Speaker, tax rises aren't the only way he's making working people worse off. 2.5 million working families will face a double whammy. A national insurance tax rise and £1,000 a year universal credit cut. They're getting hit from both sides. Of all the ways to raise public funds, why is the Prime Minister insisting on hammering working people?
Mr. Speaker, we're proud of what we've been doing throughout this pandemic to look after working people. We're proud of the extra £9 billion we put in through universal credit. And, Mr. Speaker, I think people in this House and across the country should know Labour wants to scrap universal credit altogether. We believe in higher wages and better skills, Mr. Speaker, and it is working. That's why we're investing in 13,500 work coaches, £3,000 a year for 11 million adults across this country to train under the Lifetime Skills Guarantee. And it's working, Mr. Speaker, because for the first time since 2019, after years and years of stagnation, you are seeing wages are rising, Mr. Speaker. Wages are rising for the lower paid. They believe in welfare. We believe in higher wages and higher skills and better jobs.
Blimey, there's a lot of noise there. It's a bit sign of how the House of Commons is full. But Keir Starmer seems to be inching towards a sort of political attack of hammering working people. We were just discussing universal credit earlier as well. And that's likely to come back to the House of Commons next week. So he's got a political attack line without having an alternative.
Yes. And the interesting thing about the universal credit criticism is that, again, it's coherent from the Labour Party. The government is going to be taking money, particularly away from low paid, with the national insurance increase and the universal credit increase. But in another way, it's testament to the coherence of Rishi Sunak, regardless of whether it's economically illiterate or will cause the government political headaches later. Rishi Sunak has imposed upon this government a very coherent and understandable to the public way of thinking about government spending, which is if we commit to something, and Boris Johnson likes committing to public spending, as we've seen, it has to be paid for. You know, take away the universal credit, increase tax to pay for the NHS. You know, it's a very, Rishi Sunak is not a tax and spend conservative. He's a fiscal conservative. And that idea of, well, either we're going to have to cut something or we're going to have to raise revenue elsewhere. And Keir Starmer pointing out you're taking away universal credit from people. Rishi Sunak will stand up many times, indeed has already stood up before the Commons in public, and he'll say, well, look, I have to make these tough decisions. The government doesn't have very much money, but, we're tackling the questions that no one else wants to. And I'm going to pay for it somehow.
And his popularity has been so huge, and public support for what Rishi Sunak has done for the last 18 months, in terms of literally paying people's wages, all the financial support for individuals and businesses. I know it's not been universal, but lots of people, and it comes up all the time in our focus groups, lots of people like what he's done. And essentially, he's going to cash some of that in now. The people are going to. He's hoping it's a gamble by the government, but it's maybe they think it's one worth taking. That the credit they've got for the past 18 months for putting in place so much support, they can cash in some of that credit now by taking those tough decisions.
And it's that affectation of sort of frankness with the public. Two, the public more readily understand the idea that the government has to tax to spend. And I'm much more comfortable with that, or has to cut to spend and the government doesn't have a finite amount of money, then you are making the economic case that interest rates are really low and we should borrow to invest. All the public hears is borrowing, debt, that's horrific.
And actually, I do think one of the sort of broader impacts of the past 18 months of the pandemic and people watching those press conferences and really engaging in the intricacies of government decision-making is that it comes up all the time in the focus group. People have quite a sophisticated understanding of the decisions that government ministers have to make and the trade-offs and all that sort of thing. Well, let's go back because it's time for question number 6, which is always where we'll get the peroration, both sides overreaching for their social media clips. So this is question number 6 from Keir Starmer.
Higher wages and higher skills, he says. How out of touch he is. What do they laugh? What do they say to Rosie? What do they say to Rosie? Because Rosie's the sort of person that this impacts on. Laugh away. A single mother working on the minimum wage in a nursing home. She got in touch with me. She will lose £87 a month due to the universal credit cut. A huge amount to her. She will now also be hit with a national insurance tax rise. She's asked for more shifts. and she can't get them. She's unable to get further help with childcare. What does the Prime Minister, what does the laughter say to Rosie? This is a government that underfunded the NHS for a decade before the pandemic, took £8 million out of social care before the pandemic, then wasted billions of pounds of taxpayers' money on dodgy contracts, vanity projects and giveaways to their mates. They cut stamp duty on second homeowners, super tax deductions for the biggest companies, and now they're telling millions of working people that they must cough up more tax. Isn't this the same old Tory party, always putting their rich mates and donors before working people?
I mean, we should just jump in there. It's the same old Tory party putting up taxes to fund the NHS. It's a hard... He's trying to refight what happened before yesterday, isn't he?
Yeah, the interesting question is what will the public, when that NHS levy comes out of their pay slips for the first time, will they see we're funding our NHS, the government is doing a good thing here, or, as the Labour Party bet, will they resent the fact that money is coming out of their pay slip? They thought, well, hang on, weren't we already paying for the NHS, etc., etc. And that's the big gamble both sides are making, that the public will see this policy in the terms they want them to see it.
We just had a message in from Peter who said, and we've had loads of this sort of thing, and I've had it on social media in the last couple of days as well. Didn't the Brexit bus offer £350 million a week for the NHS, so we don't need the national insurance increase? And this has mainly come, it has to be said, from Twitter accounts with the European Union flag in the handle. I mean, you could argue, if basically lots of people would accept that the £350 million figure was nonsense and it was a gross figure, not a net figure and all of that, but actually Theresa May massively increased NHS funding, which was dressed up as a delivery on that promise when she was Prime Minister. And this is more money. And I just don't know if this attack of same old Tory party works when they're putting loads of money into the NHS.
Yeah, indeed. And the polling we had over the weekend did suggest that this was a pretty safe bet politically. YouGov did a snap poll yesterday where it was essentially deadlocked. 44% supported the NI rise, 43% opposed it, and it all comes down to how the public feel in time and whether they feel like they're getting their money's worth.
Yeah, well, that was the last questions from Keir Starmer. Let's hear how Boris Johnson responded.
Well, I think very sadly, Mr. Speaker, what you're hearing is the same old nonsense from Labour, because what they want to do, they want to scrap a universal credit, and I have every sympathy for Rosie, and I admire her and families up and down the land. But the best thing we can do for them is have a strong and dynamic economy. And as I speak to you now, our economy is the fastest growing in the G7, Mr. Speaker, because we've had the fastest vaccine rollout and the fastest opening up of any comparable country, Mr. Speaker. And never forget that he would have kept us in the European Medicines Agency. He attacked the vaccines task force, Mr. Speaker. And if we'd listened to Captain Hindsight in July, Mr. Speaker, we wouldn't have the fastest growing economy in the G7. We'd still be in lockdown, Mr. Speaker. It's true. And if we listened to him today, we wouldn't be trying to fix the NHS backlogs, and we wouldn't be finally dealing with social care, Mr. Speaker. This is the country, this is the government that takes the tough decisions to take this country forward.
Such loud cheers there, it's distorting the microphones.
Also, something that's been slightly annoying me for this entire session, it's not a substantial criticism of Keir Starmer, but he gets very squeaky. It's almost like he's, leading a House Martins tribute band. It's so nasal. And
famously, he was in a band with Norman Cook.
Oh, yes.
Oh, he played the violin with
Played the violin with Norman Cook, who was later the bassist of the House Martins. Yeah.
That's the sort of trivia you don't get on the other side.
No. I could talk to you all afternoon about the House Martins, but that's 11 o'clock tomorrow. Interesting. It's really interesting. I was just scrolling through Twitter as Boris Johnson, as he got to Captain Hindsight, I mentally checked out. And at the top of my feed, this tweet from Aaron Bastani, not often a man quoted approvingly on Times Radio, but he said exactly the same thing as the Prime Minister, as does the rest of the left of the Labour Party, as do lots of Labour MPs from across the Labour Party privately, which is watching PMQs and just wow. Grown-up politics seemingly means the government has no opposition for 5 years. Labour having no policy on anything is giving Johnson such a free hand. and it's very difficult to disagree with that.
So that's the view from the left. Here's a view from Dominic Cummings, who's also just tweeted, "Tell your friends, the Tories are making the young who can't get a house or and working for average, below average income, already screwed by a decade of hapless Tory government," of which he was a part, to work harder to subsidise older rich people. They promised to do the opposite. Hashtag regime change. So anyway, there we are. The strange old world. Ara Bastani, big voice of the left,
endorsing Boris Johnson,
and Dominic Cummings condemning his own role in government and calling for regime change. That's politics for you. And that was PMQs Unpacked, where we pause the action live in the House of Commons.